"They don't need to," he replied, his hand brushing hers. "This is about us, not them." The bond between them grew stronger, fueled by late-night conversations and shared silences. Emma felt herself falling, even as the doubts whispered in the back of her mind. It was there, always, a presence below the surface, or in the fantasy, tonight or tomorrow. But Ethan was guarded, his past a puzzle she couldn't piece together. Every time she asked, he deflected with a charm that left her breathless and frustrated. The broadcast opened with the somber voice of a news anchor. Soon the airplanes screeched into the airfield, and then a broadcast opened with the somber voice of a news anchor. Authorities in Willow Creek are searching for Emma Harper, a 27-year-old teacher who was last seen on Friday evening. Witnesses report she was walking into the woods with an unidentified man. Harper has been missing for 3 days, and police are urging anyone with information to come forward. The camera cut to Emma's smiling photograph. Her kind eyes and warm expression now seemed to haunt the town, a stark contrast to the mystery surrounding her sudden disappearance. She seemed different, a neighbor recalled in a shaky voice. Emma wasn't herself that day. I saw her walking toward the woods with this man, tall, dark hair, a face I didn't recognize. Emma's movements that evening had been uncharacteristic. Normally reserved, she had stepped into the woods as if drawn by something, or someone. The man beside her kept his face low, his demeanor confident yet cold. End of Book 3. End of the Sunburns. And what made her follow him? A whispered thought lingered in the air, unanswered. Behind Emma's bright smile lay cracks no one cared to notice. Friends whispered about her engagement that had ended in heartbreak. The man she once loved had left her adrift in a sea of loneliness. Her sister Clara's voice rang with anger the last time they spoke. "You can't trust everyone who comes into your life, Emma. Not everyone has good intentions." Emma had dismissed Clara's words with a wave of her hand, tired of hearing the same warnings. "You don't understand. I need to feel like someone sees me again." Emma. But now, those warnings felt like echoes of betrayal. Had Emma ignored the signs? Or had she known exactly what she was walking into? A search party found the first signs of her that Saturday morning. A bracelet glinted in the sunlight, broken and tangled in the underbrush. Nearby, the faint outline of footprints led deeper into the woods, uneven as though someone had struggled. Tom Grayson, the town's only investigator, knelt beside the scene, his jaw tightening. "This isn't random," he muttered under his breath, picking up the bracelet. It was engraved. E.H. Emma didn't just walk away. Clara's voice cracked as she stood behind him, her hands trembling. "Something happened here, didn't it?" Tom's silence was telling. The woods loomed over Willow Creek like a living shadow. Their dense canopy swallowed the sunlight, leaving an eerie twilight in its place. The searchers spoke in hushed tones, as if the trees could hear them. Rumors mingled through the trees. Scanners spotted the bandits leaving their campsite, and searchers spoke in hushed tones, as if the trees could hear them. "It's too quiet," someone whispered, their flashlight darting between the gnarled trunks. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed to carry a sinister undertone. It was as though the forest itself had conspired to keep its secrets hidden. The deeper the search went, the more oppressive the atmosphere grew, wrapping each step in dread. The question hung like a noose. Why did Emma, cautious and kind, follow a stranger into the woods? She wasn't reckless, Clara insisted. She must have had a reason. Theories brewed among the townsfolk. Some whispered she had been charmed. Others speculated darker motives. But one question burned brighter than the rest. Who was the man, and what did he want from Emma? The evidence told a fractured story, one littered with clues that only deepened the mystery. "Do you think she's—" Clara's voice faltered as she stood beside Tom. Tom didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the horizon of twisted branches. "We'll find her," he said, though the weight in his tone betrayed the certainty of his words. The woods seemed to whisper promises of betrayal, secrets buried beneath their roots. The truth, when it surfaced, would tear lives apart and reveal the shadow Emma had willingly stepped into. Emma Harper stepped off the bus, her suitcase in one hand and the other clutching her phone. The familiar sights of Willow Creek greeted her, but they felt colder now. The town she once called home had changed, or maybe it was her. The ache of her broken engagement clung to her like a second skin, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. Her sister Clara's voice echoed in her mind. "You can't just run away, Emma. You have to face it." But what was there to face when everything she had planned for was gone? Willow Creek's streets were too quiet, its small shops and smiling neighbors too intimate. Emma felt out of place, a stranger in her own past. Her days became repetitive, morning coffee at the kitchen table, evenings walks through the town, evenings spent flipping through old photo albums. "Have you seen anyone since you got back?" Clara had asked over the phone one evening. Emma hesitated. "Not really. It's just hard." Clara sighed, her frustration barely hidden. "You're not going to feel better hiding in that house. You need to talk to someone, Emma." But who was there to talk to? No one could understand the hollow ache that followed her everywhere. Despite the emptiness, Emma longed for something new, something to remind her she was still alive, still capable of feeling. As she watched the sunset from her porch one evening, she whispered to herself, "It can't always be like this, can it?" That quiet yearning became a small flame. She wanted connection, stability, a reason to believe again. But she didn't know that in her search for solace, she'd find something far more dangerous. It was on one of those evening walks that she first saw him, Ethan Calloway. His face was older than she remembered, sharper around the edges, but his smile was the same, warm, inviting, and just a little too knowing. "Emma Harper," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "I didn't think I'd see you back here." She stopped, startled by the recognition in his tone. "Ethan." "It's been years." "Too long," he replied, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer than was comfortable. "What brings you back?" "Just needed a change." Her answer felt weak under his gaze, but he didn't press. "Change is good," he said with a smirk. "Sometimes it's all we need." Ethan's return had stirred more than just Emma's memories. The townspeople had their own stories about him, stories that didn't align with his charming demeanor. "Ethan Calloway?" Clara's voice was sharp when Emma mentioned him. "He's trouble, Emma. Always has been." "He says he's changed?" Emma countered, though the doubt in her voice was hard to miss. "People like him don't change," Clara snapped. "They just get better at hiding who they are." Still, Emma couldn't shake the pull she felt toward him. He had a way of making her feel seen, as though her pain wasn't something to be fixed, but something he understood. Ethan's presence was magnetic, drawing Emma in despite the warnings. He spoke of new beginnings, of leaving the past behind. But his past was a shadow that followed him everywhere. Over coffee one afternoon, he leaned in close, his voice low. "You ever feel like you don't belong, Emma? Like the world's just waiting for you to slip up?" She nodded, her chest tightening. "All the time." His smile was brief, almost sad. Then maybe we're not so different. You're spending a lot of time with him, Clara said one evening, her arms crossed as she stood in Emma's kitchen. Emma frowned. Why does it matter? He's been kind to me, Clara. That's what worries me. People don't just change overnight. You don't know him like I do, Emma snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. And you don't see what I see, Clara replied, her voice softening. I just don't want you to get hurt again. At the diner, Tom Grayson watched Emma from across the room, his coffee untouched. He had known her since they were kids, and he could see the weariness in her eyes, the way she forced herself to smile. When she caught him staring, he gave her a small wave. She hesitated before walking over. Tom, she said, her tone warm but distant. Emma, he replied, his voice steady. How are you holding up? I'm fine, she lied. He nodded, not pressing further. If you ever need anything. She smiled faintly. Thanks, Tom. The gossip around Ethan and Emma spread quickly. At the general store, hushed voices debated his intentions. She's vulnerable, one woman murmured. Ethan's not the kind of man you trust, another said. But Emma paid no mind. Their words were noise, drowning in the way Ethan made her feel. The more people warned her, the more Emma retreated. She stopped taking Clara's calls, avoided Tom at the diner, and spent more time with Ethan. And they don't understand, she told him one evening. And yet, she didn't pull away. Instead, she clung to the hope that she could fix whatever was broken in him, just as he seemed to mend what was shattered in her. Ethan leaned against the counter of the small-town cafe, his eyes following Emma as she fumbled with her order. Need some help there? He asked, a teasing edge to his tone. She glanced up, flustered. Oh, no, just... Not great with choices lately. Life's full of bad options, he said with a shrug, his grin softening the weight of the words. But you seem like someone who picks carefully. Emma smiled faintly, appreciating the odd compliment. Somehow, his presence felt grounding, as if he understood the chaos she'd tried so hard to hide. By the following week, Ethan and Emma were seen together regularly, strolling through the park, talking quietly over coffee. Their connection sparked curiosity and unease. She's been through so much, Mrs. Gilroy muttered to the cashier at the general store. That man? Trouble. Always has been. Another customer chimed in. People like Ethan don't just change overnight. Someone should talk to her before it's too late. The whispers grew louder, but Emma paid them no mind. Ethan made her feel seen, and that was a feeling she wasn't willing to give up. Ethan's charm was intoxicating. He had a way of brushing off his past like an old coat he'd outgrown. People love to talk, he told her during one of their late-night conversations. They don't know who I really am. Emma nodded, wanting to believe him. I get it. Sometimes people see only what they want to see. His hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her chest. I'm glad you see more than that, Emma. But even as her heart leaned toward him, a quiet voice in her mind warned her to step back. She ignored it, clinging instead to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Ethan was her fresh start. Ethan had a way of making Emma feel safe, but there were moments when his eyes grew distant, his smile too forced. She caught glimpses of a darker man beneath the surface, but he never let her linger on them. You're too good to me, she said one evening, resting her head against his shoulder. You deserve better, he replied, his voice low. But this is all I have to give? He spoke of redemption, of starting over, and Emma drank it in like water in a desert. No one's perfect, he'd tell her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But I'm trying, for what it's worth." He always knew the right words, the ones that quieted her doubts and filled the lonely spaces in her heart. Yet, every so often, his reassurance felt rehearsed, as though he'd said it all before. Ethan's past was a puzzle, each piece more confusing than the last. He claimed to have worked odd jobs across the country, yet his stories didn't align. "I was in Portland for a few years," he said one night. "But I thought you said you lived in Denver during that time," Emma replied, her brow furrowing. He waved her concern away. "I moved around a lot. It's hard to keep track." His casual dismissal didn't sit right, but she didn't press. The way he looked at her, as if she were the only person who mattered, kept her questions at bay. She didn't want to know the truth if she could help it. She felt more safe with him here under his command. Over time, Ethan began to guide her choices in subtle ways. "You don't need to go to that book club," he'd say. "They don't really get you." Or, "Why don't we just stay in tonight? You don't need anyone else but me." It was always framed as care, but Emma started to feel the walls around her closing in. So she died, to rest beyond her grave, except to breathe. Clara's patience wore thin as Emma's dependence on Ethan grew. "He's isolating you," she said one evening, her voice sharp with frustration. "You don't know him," Emma shot back, crossing her arms defensively. "I know enough to see what he's doing," Clara replied, her tone softening. "Emma, you're stronger than this. You don't need him." "No, I mean it." Emma shook her head, unwilling to hear it. "You don't get it, Clara. He's the first person who's made me feel whole again." Carol's thoughts too, she nodded in approval, and the dark elf trudged off to work at the barrel, slowly climbing the tension between them deepened, each conversation ending in an argument. Clara tried to warn her, but Emma saw it as control. "You don't trust me to make my own choices," Emma snapped. "I trust you," Clara said softly. "I don't trust him." Emma began noticing strange patterns. Ethan would vanish for hours without explanation, his phone going straight to voicemail. When she asked, he'd smile and say, "I just needed some time to think." But the doubts festered, growing louder with each passing day. Rumors spread about Ethan's time away from Willow Creek. An ex-girlfriend's name surfaced, her story painting him as controlling, manipulative, even dangerous. The hell with her right now. Emma wrestled with her feelings, torn between the man she wanted to believe in and the shadows creeping into her mind. "Am I just imagining it?" she whispered to herself one night, staring at her reflection. In the lamplight, she seemed to look much older. She touched her forehead to the torn cloth. She said the cracks in Ethan's facade grew harder to ignore, but every time Emma tried to confront him, he'd pull her back in with sweet words and tender touches. "Let's get away," Ethan suggested one evening, his hand warm on hers. "Just you and me, away from all this noise." Emma hesitated but nodded. "Okay, just us." That night, as they walked hand in hand toward the woods, Emma's heart raced with anticipation and unease. She told herself it was trust, but deep down, she knew it was something else entirely. The town awoke to a suffocating stillness. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, but it carried no warmth. Emma Harper was gone. Clara's calls to her sister had gone unanswered, and by noon her growing dread spread across Willow Creek. "She wouldn't just leave," Clara told Tom Grayson, her voice shaking. "Something's wrong, Tom. I feel it." Tom nodded grimly, the weight of her words mirrored in his somber expression. The quiet streets seemed to echo with unspoken fears. the usual hum of small-town life replaced by an unnerving void. By afternoon, search parties had gathered at the edge of the woods. Flashlights cut through the shadows as volunteers and officers combed the dense forest. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation and unease. "Over here," a voice called out. Tom approached quickly, his eyes landing on a torn scarf caught on a low-hanging branch. A few feet away lay a scuffed shoe, its heel snapped clean off. Clara clutched her chest as she recognized the items. "That's hers," she whispered, her face pale. The ground nearby bore faint signs of disturbance: flattened grass, a trail of broken twigs. It was as if the woods themselves had swallowed Emma whole, leaving behind only fragments of her presence. Ethan arrived at the scene, his usual confidence replaced by a subdued demeanor. "I don't know what happened," he said, his voice measured but lacking conviction. "She wanted to take a walk. I didn't think anything of it." Clara's anger flared. "You were the last person with her. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Ethan snapped, his calm slipping. "She said she needed space. I left her there for 5 minutes. When I came back, she was gone." Tom watched him closely, noting the tremor in Ethan's hand as he spoke. Something about his story felt off, too rehearsed. By the next day, Willow Creek was buzzing with speculation. Some defended Ethan, claiming his demeanor didn't fit that of a guilty man. "He's always been misunderstood," one neighbor said. "People are just looking for someone to blame." Others weren't so forgiving. "He's trouble," Mrs. Gilroy murmured. "Always has been. You don't just walk away from someone in the woods." Nico quickly turned her attention to the doctor and the sudden scramble for a safe retreat. The divide grew sharper, suspicion rippling through the town like an unseen force. Amid the growing tension, investigators uncovered chilling details: a faint trail of blood leading deeper into the woods, scratches on the bark of a tree, as though someone had grasped it in desperation. Clara stared at the evidence, her voice breaking. "She wouldn't just leave. She fought. I know she did." Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though the doubt in his own mind remained unshaken. As the investigation deepened, Ethan's past began to surface. Records revealed a restraining order filed by a former girlfriend, citing emotional manipulation and threats. "He makes you feel like you're everything," her statement read, "and then he takes it all away." The discovery sent shockwaves through the town, tarnishing the image Ethan had worked so hard to project. But not everyone believed the story was so simple. A witness claimed to have seen Ethan leaving the woods alone, his face pale and his shirt disheveled. Ethan countered with an explanation, saying he'd fallen while searching for Emma. Tom's jaw tightened as he reviewed the statements. The truth felt just out of reach, hidden behind layers of half-truths and conflicting accounts. The blood trail, coupled with scratches on Ethan's arms, painted a grim picture. Clara clutched her sister's scarf as investigators pieced together a terrifying possibility. Emma had tried to run. "She trusted you," Clara spat at Ethan during questioning, her voice thick with rage. "And you destroyed her. She was your brother after all. And yet you chose to leave her behind. She cried to the stars." "I didn't hurt her," Ethan interrupted, his fists clenching. But the evidence told a story he couldn't control, one that painted him as the architect of Emma's disappearance. Then came the breakthrough. Hidden beneath a cluster of leaves was a notebook Emma always carried. Inside, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "He lied. I shouldn't have trusted him." Harold listened for a moment. When he was certain he was alone, he opened. The discovery shifted the narrative entirely, casting an unrelenting spotlight on Ethan. Clara stared at the notebook, her heart heavy. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew." But it was too late. As the pieces began to fall into place, the town braced for the truth, a truth that would leave none of them unchanged. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she turned over the scarf Emma left behind. The fabric still smelled faintly of her sister's perfume, a cruel reminder of her absence. "I should have done more," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "I should have stopped her that night." Tom leaned against the counter, watching her with a heavy heart. "You couldn't have known, Clara," he said gently, though the words felt hollow. "Yes, but I knew something was wrong," she replied, her eyes filled with tears. "I let her walk into it, and now she's gone." In Willow Creek, every conversation carried a sharp edge, every glance held suspicion. Parents held their children closer, and doors were locked earlier than usual. "Do you think he did it?" a woman asked her neighbor outside the bakery. "Who else could it be?" the neighbor replied. "But if it wasn't him, who knows what kind of person we're dealing with?" Fear gripped the town, the once tight cat-knit community unraveling under the weight of distrust. Emma's disappearance left a void no one could fill. Her family's grief became a wall between them, each member retreating into their own sorrow. "Shh! I don't know how to talk to her anymore," Clara admitted to Tom one evening. "Every time I see Mom, I see her blaming me." "She's not blaming you," Tom assured her. "She's hurting, like you are." Clara shook her head. "It doesn't matter, nothing feels right anymore." As investigators dug deeper, Ethan's facade crumbled. Records surfaced of a woman in another town who had filed a restraining order against him, her claims eerily similar to Clara's worst fears. "He made me trust him," the woman's statement read, "and then he turned that trust into control." The revelations painted a damning picture, though they offered little solace to those searching for answers. The courtroom was tense, every testimony pulling the town further into turmoil. Ethan maintained his innocence, his lawyer arguing that the evidence was circumstantial. "What happened that night is a tragedy," Ethan said, his voice steady as he addressed the jury. "But I didn't hurt her. I loved her." The words sent a chill through Clara, who sat in the gallery. She clenched her fists, her mind replaying every moment she had begged Emma to walk away. Even as the trial concluded, questions lingered. Where had Emma gone? Why had she left those final words in her notebook? And, most hauntingly, what had truly happened in the woods that night? Willow Creek would never be the same. The woods stood as a silent monument to the secrets they held, and the people carried the weight of Emma's story in every whispered conversation. Clara, standing at the edge of the forest one last time, murmured, "I'll never stop looking for you." The wind carried her words into the trees, their echoes a reminder that some shadows never truly fade. Trust, once shattered, leaves wounds that rarely heal. For Emma, it had been her vulnerability, a quiet longing for connection, that allowed her to see only what she wanted in Ethan. His words, like a balm, had masked the subtle cracks in his facade. Clara sat by the window, staring into the dark woods beyond. "She believed in him," she murmured to Tom, her voice heavy with sorrow. "And it cost her everything." Tom nodded slowly. "Trust is a powerful thing. It makes us blind to what we don't want to see." Emma's story wasn't just one of misplaced faith, but also of ignored intuition. How many times had Clara tried to warn her? How many nights had she replayed their last argument, wishing she had said more? She knew something was wrong, Clara whispered to herself, clutching Emma's scarf, but she stayed silent because she wanted to believe he was different. No. The weight of that silence pressed down on her like a storm cloud. each moment a reminder of what had been lost. Betrayal doesn't simply disappear. It leaves behind echoes, a haunting reminder of choices made and trust destroyed. Ethan's actions, whether intentional or not, had unraveled Emma's life and shattered those around her. "Every time I think of her," Clara said, her voice breaking, "I see his shadow over everything she loved. He took that from her, from us." Tom placed a hand on her shoulder. "Betrayal leaves scars, but it's what we do next that matters." As the woods remained silent and Emma's fate uncertain, the lesson left behind was one of caution and reflection. Trust, once given, must be earned, and silence, though easier in the moment, often carries the heaviest cost. "She deserved better," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the forest. "But maybe her story will stop it from happening again." Tom looked at her, his expression solemn. "It will, because we won't forget." The choices that had led them here would echo through Willow Creek forever, a somber reminder of the delicate balance between faith and doubt. If a bad thing happened to or damaged life in the neighborhood, children had no place outside the town.